So welcome back, everyone. We are grateful, SCABC, or St. Charles Avenue Baptist Church, and Rain. We're used to these conversations. We welcome again and are grateful for Sarah Chancellor Watson at SCABC, St. Charles Avenue Presbyterian Church, and our West Bank colleague, Reverend Joe Cooper. So Reverend, it is good to see you this beautiful, I think so far, Wednesday afternoon as we await Delta. Lord, help her die. That's all I'm saying. So we are into this week of reading and began our conversation with what is contentious, what is sometimes feels like in culture wars or related to the ideas of racial justice and racial injustice, the either or propositions. Are we in or are we out? And how do we navigate as pastors, congregations, all of us together working in the same direction related to being truth tellers? Of being Christ-like with grace and a firmness of love that is willing to risk being nice with being like Jesus, being willing to tell the truth. So with that, we have acknowledged some of the history of our city, and Reverend Elizabeth Lott was the only person around about New Orleans at the time with Mayor Mitch Landrieu. Many of you will remember. So dear colleagues, when it comes to monuments, when it comes to our own churches, what continues to speak to you within these pages of Robbie Jones' good work here?
I think the conviction for me, even though I'm new to New Orleans, new to the West Bank, obviously from afar, when the monuments were taken down, and so I don't have a strong emotional connection to them. But what this chapter, where it challenged me, were those things that I have set in concrete in my own life that are keeping me from moving forward, that are keeping me from living into that hope of Jesus Christ that's not always comfortable, that doesn't, it's as though Jesus never read the prayer of Jabez, it's like, but that it's not always about me getting what I want, me being comfortable, but there are some things in my life that I have to be willing to tear down if I'm going to be able to move forward. And so I don't have a strong connection to what was once there and is no longer there. But in my own life, I see that happening as scripture says, the plank in my eye is becoming so uncomfortable, and I'm, and so I know there are things in my life. And so that's kind of the way that I can make peace with the chapter, if you will. And I don't mean to be offensive one way or the other, but there are just some things in my life that I have to be willing to tear down for the sake, not even so much for peace, but to be true to the calling of Christ. And so that has helped me as I move forward in the chapter of just finding those things, and it's not comfortable. It's not pleasant. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with it. But yeah.
I really appreciate that perspective, because I was sitting here thinking, I lived in Richmond, Virginia for 10 years and then have been here for 7. So the monuments that are all coming down in Richmond this year, that was one of the first places you would take people who had come to town to visit. I mean, Monument Avenue was the central, the way he describes it in the book doesn't even do it justice. I mean, it's a gorgeous avenue, and to see the images of the spray paint and the protests and the fact that almost all of them have come down now is just remarkable to me. And then I was here for the monuments coming down in New Orleans, and it does feel like being part of a moment. It feels like being part of something that's moving forward. And so I know how exciting, even if that is me taking a stand on one side of a story, I know it's how exciting that can be. But I wonder if there's something intoxicating too about, oh good, now we fixed it. rather than, Joe, what you're talking about, that really hard work of what inside of me needs to be taken down, which is endlessly harder work. At the bottom of 152, Jones cites Landrieu's speech when the monuments were going to start coming down in New Orleans. And Landrieu writes or said, these monuments purposefully celebrate a fictional, sanitized Confederacy. They were erected purposefully to send a strong message to all walked in their shadows about who was still in charge of this city. And so I think when I first read that and hear that, I mean, I remember him giving that speech, but initially it's like that puts a fire in me. I was like, that's right, this is fictionalized. We're going to draw a line in the sand. And as we've been talking for the past hour, I find that I've moved to this place of deep empathy for people who are grieving the loss of their fictions. I mean, in the same way, in the last discussion, when we talked about personal relationship with Jesus as your Lord and Savior being theology that was created and manipulated to support white supremacy, there was so much grief in that section. And one person in a discussion talked about feeling betrayed by the church that had played this kind of switching game with her. And so I think that's where I am right now, is this empathy of, we need to do the work of saying this is a fiction that we've got to tell the truth about now. But there's such grief in that for people. And so maybe that's a place where I can meet someone who has a very, very different perspective than I do.
I think I was aware, as we mentioned earlier, just in our conversation, that there was a hot button in our system of Pastor Marissa Tuso and me being appointed here from different places almost a little over 3 years ago now. And these matters, Elizabeth, had just sort of been resolved in the sense of the taking down, and to borrow some of your language too, Reverend Joanne, that it is an interesting turn in it to go metaphorical and literal, and in our spirituality or devotional life over against monumentalizing for real, and what we remember, history remembered. I say this because it was a hot button, at least in the mind of our pastors, one who was retiring, a very dear colleague and friend to this day, who said, probably don't want to go there. And I was in Baton Rouge, so I knew some of the storylines and how it kind of was a head cock to me. I was like, wait, what? Really? That surprised me. And making sense of that too. I love this idea of, breaking down. What else needs to be torn down in my own life? We've talked quite a bit in this past hour about our own sort of existential struggle as people, not just as pastors, which is important, but as people. And we're seeing a little more readily our own supremacy, perhaps, our own, if not privilege, supremacy. And I think wrestling with that in this way will turn it just a bit when we think of our own congregations, when we think of our own brick and mortar buildings. We've mentioned before that Rain, our namesake is Rain Memorial, was a very wealthy merchant. We're not clear on the history, speaking of, that he was a slaveholder, at least insofar as his residence in the Crescent City, just 2 blocks away, on the corner of General Taylor and Carondelet, Peniston and Carondelet. That said, I would breathe a sigh of relief to know for sure that somehow our forebearer, Rain, didn't own slaves, but I can't say that for sure. The question is this, though: in our own iconography, our own monumentalizing in our sanctuary, from Gretna to St. Charles Avenue Baptist, St. Charles Avenue Presbyterian, what do you see? What do we see represented as the living Christ, the way that we have artistically, probably beautifully conveyed who Jesus is in what color exactly? What comes to mind there, y'all?
Well, again, pointing back to Richmond in the section where he's talking about St. Paul's Episcopal, it's so easy, or the National Cathedral in DC. It's so much easier to point to somebody else's images and building and go, oh, well, they should just tear that stuff out and sell the building and pay a reparation. It's so easy for me to take a stand on it. And we at St. Charles Avenue Baptist don't have a strong handle on our early history. All I know is that in 1898, the first group met in a former servants' quarters in Carrollton. And so we have talked about, okay, well, if servants, 1898, if it was already an old building at that point, a couple of decades, but what were they before they were servants? So that's about the only piece that we have. We don't have an endowment. We don't have giant coffers of money that we can trace back. But that doesn't mean that we don't stand on the shoulders of some kind of privilege. And then I have been pretty open in talking about that what limited stained glass we have in the building is very white, very 1960s white country church Jesus. And I don't like it. So we've been very purposeful about adding art to newer spaces in our building that come from different parts of the world to diversify in some ways. But I wouldn't mind if the lawnmower threw up a couple of rocks strategically and knocked some windows out.
Our church, I don't know if I need to find out this story. I don't know if this is a concerted effort or if it just sort of unfolded over the decades, but the stained glass that we have in our sanctuary is abstract. And then the chapel windows are the creation story. So there are two depictions of humans, a man and a woman, kind of representing all of humanity, and they're all kinds of colors. They're all rainbowed. And the only other pictures we have up are more florals and creation but we also have our library with all of the senior pastors, which are all white men. And many of whom are very revered to this day. And I still hear stories of Dr. Land and Dr. Pfeiffer and all of that. But one thing that came to mind was we celebrate on the last Sunday of October, Reformation Sunday. And for us, that means Scottish Heritage Sunday. And we deck out our sanctuary with these Scottish tartan banners that were donated from different families who trace their heritage back to Scotland. And we even found the Louisiana tartan, which is a really beautiful greens and blues, and which I think it's fun. I love the bagpipes. But there's something about, that we really celebrate this, just this one small piece of who we are as Presbyterians, and really elevate this Scottish heritage. And so, what does that say if you don't share that heritage? And, can you take part in that? Is that limiting us? Is just thinking about that, because that's coming up again, and we're going to celebrate it a little differently this year. But yeah, it's something that people really look forward to. It's just a big deal. So I think that's sort of something I just realized talking about this, one of our sort of iconography sticking points. And I'm also deep into sermon writing on the golden calf in Exodus. So thinking about what images, what things do we make and project on God and godliness and righteousness, and forget about all that God is, and forget all that God has done for us. So
we're fortunate, I guess, in the fact that our sanctuary was completed in 2005, actually right before Katrina. And so we do have stained glass on the sides in our sanctuary that depict followers of Jesus, but it is a little more abstract. You don't see the European look as much. But there's a beautiful painting. It takes up one whole side of the narthex, which is a huge area. And Jesus is not white. And as a matter of fact, people around the table are in turbans and sombreros and all different ethnicities of people. And so it's beautiful, and it's a reminder, and that's the first thing that we see. But then I wonder in my own speak when I talk about the marginalized and I talk about the outcast, that's from my perspective. I'm deeming who is marginalized and who, you know, and so automatically even, and I'm becoming convicted of that. Wait a minute. I mean, there's one thing to be in need, but for me to determine who's out and who's in, so I see it, I'm seeing it more honestly in the mirror than in our spaces. So you can't help but see that mural when you walk in, and automatically it's encouraging, but it's also convicting. Because a lot of people around that table, and I'm pointing because it's over there on that side of the building, but a lot of those people who are sharing in the breaking of the bread and the drinking of the wine, I would deem marginalized and outcast. And so, you know, just in my own visuals of how I look at that. And so, yeah, I mean, as far as when you walk into our, you know, our church, there is diversity that's celebrated, but and I think that's just because we don't have those historic buildings as some of the other, you know, some of your churches do. But I don't know our history either. I don't know, being fairly new, so. But yeah, come check out the mural. It's beautiful. I'll just send you a picture.
Yeah. It would be nice to be in that place. I've only been there a few times, Joanne, and Gretna it's unique. It's different in those spaces. Elizabeth, you or Sarah. I've only been in St. Charles Avenue Pres once, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Elizabeth, you had unmuted earlier as well. Forgive me. Please go ahead.
Well, I'm also mindful of time, but I think it was Sarah who said something that reminded me of bottom of 101 in the first paragraph of the Bible and the social status quo. Joan says, in human hands, the Bible is as much a screen as a projector.
Oh, wow.
And I was just thinking that might be a nice place for us to send the groups off who are discussing. As we talk about monuments, as we talk about iconography, what's our relationship also to sacred text? And when do we use it as a screen and when is it a projector? So I think that is just a really great image to hold on to.
Yeah, let's hold there, and I'll stop recording at this point. That's perfect. And as a biblicist, self-described anyway, Elizabeth, that I forgot that quote. I'm glad you brought it up. 101. There we go.